John Thune, the Senate Minority Whip, kind enough to join us now. Senator, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Neil, and welcome back, by the way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What do you make of the president? He didn't pivot, as some of you and your colleagues had hoped, as my last guest, the former Home Depot Chairman Bob Nardelli, had hoped, to open up domestic oil production, but instead tap the petroleum reserve. He says that's enough. What do you say?
No, there's no question about it, Neil. As you know, pricing has a lot to do with expectations about the future, not just what's done in the immediate time frame. And that was a Band-Aid. I mean, releasing barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is something that's sort of a little bit of a relief valve, but this is a long-term structural supply and demand issue that only gets fixed by America becoming once again energy independent. Your previous guest talked about this, but there is no question that we have the resources in this country, if we're willing to develop them, to fill the gap. And you know, if Russia energy is taken offline, to help support our European allies and to provide America with what we need to function. But they've got to be willing to make a decision to do that. And I was hopeful, like a lot of our members were last night, that the president would come to that conclusion, make that decision based upon the really extraordinary circumstances that we're in right now. But they just can't get there. But they're going to have to. There's just no two ways about it.
Do you, and you've been very critical of the way the president's been handling just the inflation problem altogether. Is there anything he said last night, Senator, that alleviated your concerns? Now, he's mentioned in the past that if you give Build Back Better a chance, it's going to address this. Little else. What did you think?
Well, I mean, he did. His prescription for inflation is spend more money. And you know, everybody knows the textbook definition of inflation is too many dollars chasing too few of goods. And that was the problem with the rescue plan they passed last year, $2 trillion passed on a party line basis. It fueled these inflationary pressures. And so now we've got this thing that's kind of out of control year over year. If you look at inflation in January of this year, 7.5%, last year 1.4%. This is becoming a chronic problem, and what he wants to do is spend more money. I mean, that is the absolute opposite of what you would do in this situation. So yeah, there wasn't much that we heard, and again, he didn't address the energy issue, which is a big part of inflation. If you look at the price of oil now, well over $100 a barrel. Gasoline is up 40% over last year. Those all factor into inflation. That's going to continue to be a problem and only gets addressed if you are willing to deal with the supply side of the equation, and they're not doing that. I mean, they've taken off limits ANWR, they've taken off limits the Gulf, they've taken off limits federal lands, they've shut down pipelines. This is an administration that has a hostility toward liquid fuels, and I would add biofuels to that list of things too, that if they're really serious, they could do something about, but it's going to require them to chart a different path than what they've charted so far, and the path they're on right now has been dictated by the climate czars in their party, sort of the extreme left, who seem to misunderstand that electric vehicles is not a solution to the challenges that we face here and now, particularly with Ukraine and Russia.
Senator, you're probably aware that Britain wants to lead an effort to begin war crime trials to Russia, and specifically Vladimir Putin. I caught an interview of yours on PBS in which you said that Vladimir Putin is clearly a menace to the world. It's important that the world stop him, and this is the place to do it. I'm glad that everybody is stepping up to the task. You're talking about all the efforts the global community has taken, sanctions, etc. Do you believe concurrently with those sanctions and with those efforts, looking at war crimes on his part, on the henchmen who would be behind this concurrently at the same time?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. If this doesn't fit the definition of war crimes, I don't know what does. I mean, invading a sovereign country, killing innocent women and children, and the henchmen around him, the cronies around him, I think all ought to be labeled as such. And that would deprive them of access to almost anywhere in the civilized world. I think these are heinous crimes that are being committed. This is a thug who has no consideration for for the harm or the damage he's doing, not only to people in Ukraine, but people in his own country who are suffering the consequences of some of these decisions. So I think that the international community has to step up in every way possible, on every front possible, and define this for what it is, Neil. And I'm glad to see that's happening. There are countries engaging that we wouldn't have expected. You know, Switzerland's off the sidelines, amazingly, and you've seen a united front with NATO, unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime, and I'm encouraged by that. But it's partly because, and mainly because, of the inspiration I think our country and other countries are getting from the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian leadership, the way that they are standing up and defending their country and defending their freedoms and their sovereignty. That's inspiring the world, and I hope it continues.
It is, you're right. And Senator, not only have you not seen it in your lifetime, I haven't seen it in my lifetime, and I'm older than you, Senator. So
not by much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please. Senator, thank you very, very much. Good seeing you again. Senator John Thune,
Thanks, Neil.
on all of that, the Senate Minority Whip.